I am Ryan O'Dowd, and this is the Black Hand Communique. Today's episode is called the Unholy Triumvirate, which is a nice fancy word for a geopolitical team that has been connected as allies since the 70s, basically, which is the United States security state, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. Let me begin by saying that this alliance has been around covertly and overtly since about 1971, 1972. And it originally started as an alliance between two separate alliances between the United States and Israel. The United States has been an ally of Israel since 1948, when the nation was founded, and the United States and Saudi Arabia, which started to solve a specific economic problem that was occurring in the United States at the time. So, let me say this. This is all motivated by an article I read today where Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, is claiming that the Palestinian Mufti gave Hitler the idea for the final solution. And I assume he's using this as a pretext for yet another war against what looks like the third Intifada in Palestine and Israel. So it has gotten to the point where the Israeli security state is so depraved that it is now blaming the Palestinians for the Holocaust that Hitler created, while creating apologetics for Adolf Hitler, who killed the Jews. Okay, now if you see the disgusting hypocrisy in doing this, then you're probably a pretty average human being, because Israel was ostensibly founded to give a homeland to the Jews, almost as a reaction to the Holocaust. They said, we cannot be in Europe anymore. These people are fucking killing us all the time. And so they decided to go to their ancestral, very ancestral homeland 2,000 years prior. They haven't even been there for 2,000 years, where they invaded Palestine and seized the land and became a settler nation, much like England and Northern Ireland, or the Europeans in America, or Australia. And it's been a big old shitstorm ever since, because there were actually people living there already. And the difference between the people living there and, say, the Aborigines in Australia or the Native Americans in the United States is they already had guns and running water and electricity and shit. So that made for a much different situation. They couldn't just be thrown smallpox infected blankets couldn't just be thrown at them because they had doctors. So anyway, the United States and Israel have been allies. The United States actually assisted Israel in its initial quote-unquote war of liberation in 1948. I guess they thought that they were liberating the dirt of Israel from the Palestinian people, even though the people that just got rid of the Jews in Israel 2,000 years ago were the ancient Roman Empire, which you basically look at as modern Europe being revival thereof. So they were really expelled by the Romans in the first place, and then expelled by the Romans again, and then the Palestinian people suffered for it. And it is a complicated situation. And do the Jews need a homeland? I think they probably do. But then again, you cannot just expel people who already have generations and generations of lines of people there. Now, I'm going to try to avoid the controversy, but I'll probably fail at it, in explaining the unholy triumvirate between three people: the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia. Okay? Okay, so the United States helps Israel ostensibly because they were trying to give them a homeland to protect them from. Also, they wanted to interject a little bit of the United States empire into the Middle East. At that point, it was pretty much all under the hegemon of France and Britain, and the United States wanted a little bit of skin in that game, so to speak, because everybody at that time wanted oil. That's all they wanted. It's still mostly all countries want is oil, although now we are moving towards a renewable energy system because of the push of the people. The powers that be would never move towards a renewable energy system if they had any saying it because controlling a resource that's limited is worth much more to them in terms of manipulating people's behavior than giving access to a resource which everyone can own themselves. That would actually, unfortunately for them, increase human freedom overall. So you have this, the Israeli and the United States alliance going all the way back to 1948, resulting from, basically from World War II, when the Americans were the ones that liberated most of the concentration camps, and in many ways, many of the without being, this is not an anti-Semitic statement, by the way, which is the worst thing to begin a sentence with in the world. This is just a statement of fact. Many of the industrialists and wealthy people in the United States who had funded World War II to help liberate the Jewish people in Germany, and they really were liberating them, were Jewish. And so there was a Zionist contingent within these people, and therefore a Zionist contingent within the overall strategy of European liberation in World War II that led to the 1948 War of Liberation, which I put in quotes because it's not really liberating to steal somebody else's land. There you go. United States and Israel, shelve it. We're moving forward now. Post-1967 war, Israel wins against Egypt, takes control of Gaza and the West Bank, where they now have the current territory in possession that they still do today. Now, that's 1967. Shelve it. By the way, Robert F. Kennedy was killed because he supported Israel. If you ever wonder why that man got shot, it wasn't civil rights. It was a Palestinian rights activist that killed him. Go fig. Okay, so shelve it. So what happens in the early 70s that makes Saudi Arabia be, kind of fish hooked into this situation of the unholy triumvirate is the United States has been on the gold standard for some time, but the Federal Reserve, which controls our currency and general reserves as a country, even though it's a privately held bank that serves the interest of a very few amount of oligarchs and is not publicly even open to scrutiny, let alone public manipulation or given access to the people in terms of policy. The Federal Reserve has basically been lying about the amount of gold that they have. And because the Marshall Plan in the post-World War II world, they give out tons and tons and tons and tons of loans. And finally these loans are being paid back. And now because the loans are paid back from these European countries, the European countries want their gold back. They say, can we please have our gold? You say that your dollar's traded for gold, so please give us our gold back. Because if you know anything about economics, you know that land, gold, and labor are the three pillars that form all real wealth in the world, and that all the paper money is bullshit. Anyway, so Richard Nixon sees that his allies, ostensibly in Europe, really want their gold back, but he knows that we don't fucking have it to pay them. We've been fucking fudging the numbers for decades now, manipulating, lying, because this is what they do. Once they start on a good plan, they can't help but blow it over into the goddamn extreme to the point that they cannot even justify it, yes, but they can't even follow through with their own lies. It becomes impossible. So overnight, he just says, no one gets the gold anymore. We're not in the gold standard. And this rocks the economy of the United States. It sends us into recession, sends us into massive inflation, because anytime that you divorce your currency from being tied to anything in particular, if you have a purely floating currency, it's going to inflate. It just works that way. It's simple economics. And the reason why is because it keeps inflating until it becomes worth the same amount that it actually is worth, which is a piece of paper with ink on it, which isn't worth that much. A piece of paper with ink on it is worth a penny, maybe, not $1, not $100. So it's when you say it's inflating, it's really just finding its actual level as an item of value, which is bullshit, because we all know paper is not worth that much, right? So he did that, but he couldn't just divorce it from all value whatsoever, because if he just made it completely 100% free-floating while trying to control it, so it's the only currency that can be traded, at some point alternative currencies would come up and something else would find its place above $1, because it's just fucking paper. So that's the way it would work. Whether it's, horseshoes or dandelions, it doesn't even fucking matter. Something would be found to be more valuable in the eyes of the American people and the world than a dollar. And they start trading with that thing, whatever it is, and that would become our currency. So what he did was he made a backroom deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia controlled OPEC, the oil producing, wait, was it oil, petroleum exporting countries or something along those lines. Anyway, it's the people, they own the union of oil makers in the world, basically. It's like, like there's a union of bricklayers or a union of, a union of plumbers. Well, this is the union of people that own oil and export it for their main economy. And they went up to Saudi Arabia and said, listen, we see you got a little bit of a problem here. Even at that time, America had already been noticing, if not spurring on illicitly, a certain radical element in Islam in the Middle East who was gaining traction because of resistance to American and British imperialism, and also because they fucking hate Israel to death. Not Israel the people now, Israel the apartheid state, because they kicked all the Palestinians off their land, and it's sort of an Arab solidarity thing, is the way that they look at it. And anyway, the Sauds, who are, God, there's so much to get into with this, who are Wahhabists, which means they're an ultra-conservative, generally considered heretical sect of Islam. They're the people that like cutting people's heads off, hands off, setting people on fire. They crucify people. They kill women for, they have killed women for driving cars. Ultra, ultra, ultra right-wing theocrats. And so much so that most Muslims actually consider them heretics. Not just extremists, but they actually consider them to be theologically in error in terms of interpreting Muhammad. But it doesn't matter because the Sauds control Mecca and Medina, which means they control the Hajj, which means they get all the money from all the Muslims worldwide, and they're sitting on top of the world's greatest oil reserves, which means they're getting tons of money from that as well. So they have a lot of money, but what they don't have is political will, because there are these militant Islamists who are both ultra right-wing at times and also anti-imperialist, and they kind of mix them together into a melange of very appealing notions for a young and angry Muslim man in the Middle East, especially if they've been bombed by Israel or the United States. So they see that their control, their hegemon on power in Saudi Arabia is very tenuous. It doesn't have a lot of ground in terms of physical force. And in fact, today, even nowadays, the people of Saudi Arabia hate the Saudi Arabian government. They would much rather prefer to have an Islamist regime, sort of like Iran, and those who wouldn't are still very anti-American imperialist, and even if they're pro-republic or democracy, they're going to be anti-Sauds, because the Sauds are monarchs. They reign as kings in the 21st century, literally killing people, crucifying people. That's not an exaggeration. They crucify people still. And so they're very, very, very unpopular with their people. But what do the Sauds gain by giving oil to the United States? They gain military power. The United States is the most militaristic, imperialistic country that has ever existed in the history of the world. And also, until maybe the last year, we had the #1 economy that had ever existed in the world. China might have surpassed us. It's kind of a debate right now whether or not they're got a bigger GDP or we do. But soon enough, China will surpass us. But at the time, in the 1970s, America was the empire in terms of military and economics. So Nixon gets us off the gold standard, but doesn't want our money to free fall into being worth what it is, which is paper. So they make a backhand deal with the Sauds, which is this. If you allow us, or rather, if you force OPEC to only accept dollars for oil, then we will defend you in any war or for any military excursion you want us to, forever. So there's a backroom deal between the security state of the United States and the Saudi Arabian monarchy, saying, we'll defend you from your own people and from the Islamists that are going to gather around you in the Middle East because of our imperialism and your horrible, heretical, evil, ultra-conservative killing policies. if you make sure that all the OPEC nations only trade oil for dollars. What does this do? It makes the dollar the reserve currency on Earth, which means every single nation on the entire planet that wants to buy oil has to buy it using United States dollars, which means everybody holds dollars, which means our dollar stays floating above nothing. Because it would be nothing. This is very important. It would go to paper. It would go to nothing if it wasn't for this global hegemony, control over the trade of oil. So the Sauds get military help. The United States gets the petrodollar. And then, from 1971, 1972 on, you start to see this clandestine agreement between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the United States against Iran, against Iraq, moving into Iraq 2, Libya. God, there's so much to this. I don't want to make a really long video, but there's so much to this I have to explain. What do Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein have in common? They both said they were going to trade oil for something other than dollars. So what happens? They get fucking knocked out of the picture. Now, Saddam Hussein was a pretty unpopular leader, but Gaddafi was an unbelievably popular leader, and in fact considered one of the most popular leaders in Africa, and even other African states looked up to him because he gave his people money, he gave them water in the desert, he subsidized their education with the oil trade and everything else. But the reason he got taken out is because he said, I'll trade it for gold. The United States says, fuck you, you can't do that. There you go. So Israel ends up using Mossad, which is like the CIA of Israel, to, if not support, then allow ISIS to gain power. And that gets us more or less to today. And probably the United States security state funded them on some level. At some point, they gave money to Syrian insurgents who ended up becoming ISIS. Whether it was on purpose or not is speculative at this point. But it definitely was funded at some point, even if by accident, by the United States, and trained by Mossad and the CIA. But that doesn't mean that they wanted them so much as maybe they let them gain power. Anyway, it's a big hypocrisy because the big thing about ISIS is people are claiming that they're beheading people, cutting people's hands off, throwing gay people off roofs. All of that is disgusting. It's deplorable. But the irony of it is, what the Sauds do is 1,000 times worse. They execute way more people. They crucify people. They've killed women for driving cars. They've stoned women to death and people for death for adultery, just like it's fucking 4000 BC. And then we point the finger at ISIS. Why? Because pointing the finger at ISIS serves the needs of the unholy triumvirate. So there you go. It was not very brief, but I think I did a good job of explaining the history and of the alliance between the three nations of the Middle East, or fighting the Middle East for global power for the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the unholy triumvirate. I am Ryan O'Dowd, and this has been the Black Hand Communique saying, fuck the banks.